So, class, we are now on to the diencephalon. We finished the first part of the brain, the cerebrum. Remember, the cerebrum has three parts: the cerebral cortex, the white matter, and the basal nuclei. And the diencephalon also has three parts: thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. These are hard to visualize. They are deep midline structures deep within the brain. I'll try to show you multiple views to have you see how they are fitting in our brain. So this is a mid-sagittal cut. So remember, everything that is light colored, this is all part of the cerebrum except for the cerebellum. This purple part here, this is the diencephalon. This is where the diencephalon is going to be located. This lighter purple area right here, this is actually a mass-like structure. This is the thalamus. Now, there is going to be a thalamus on both sides in each cerebral hemisphere, and they are going to be connected by this structure. This is called the interthalamic adhesion. So you need to know that interthalamic adhesion. This is where the hypothalamus sits, right down here. Hypo, below the thalamus. The hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland by a structure called the infundibulum, or pituitary stalk. That's on your master list, so you'll have to know that. And back here on the epithalamus, epithalamus would be on top. And if we go all the way down here, this is a structure of the epithalamus. This is the pineal gland. This red structure here is showing you the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Because remember, we said the diencephalon is in the region of the third ventricle. So I wanted to show you this. This is actually a real brain. Here, once again, here is the corpus callosum. This is showing you the septum pellucidum. The septum pellucidum is a thin membrane that is separating the two lateral ventricles. The lateral ventricles are completely separate. The lateral ventricle of this cerebral hemisphere is deep to the septum pellucidum. Just wanted to point that out. This is the area of our diencephalon. So here, this little purplish stuff up here, this is actually the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Back in here, remember, this is the back side. This is the pineal gland. Here is the thalamus. I don't know if you can see the interthalamic adhesion. It's not real easy to see interthalamic adhesion right there. And here is the hypothalamus, and it will be connected to the pituitary gland. That is not shown here, but this is the infundibulum, where it will be connected to the pituitary gland. So I just want to show you this little animation of just how the diencephalon sits in the brain. See if I can get this to play. So if you notice, everything in red is the diencephalon. The pituitary gland that you see sticking down is in the front. And you can tell from this animation that the brainstem, which we're going to go to next, is just inferior to this diencephalon. Here is a close-up. This is showing you the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. This is going to be front. How do you know? Here's the pituitary gland, and here's the pineal gland. Pineal gland is always back. Here's the cerebellum. So this is showing you the thalamus. Here is the interthalamic adhesion. This is the hypothalamus. Here is the infundibulum that is connecting the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland, and of course the little pineal gland back here. So we keep saying that the diencephalon is in the area of the third ventricle. So I want to bring in a ventricle cast. This is a cast model of a ventricle. So here is one of the lateral ventricles here. Here is the third ventricle. The third ventricle is thin, very thin. It's a midline structure. I'll show it another view to you. Here, there's going to be a hole in this third ventricle to allow that interthalamic adhesion to pass through. Here's going to be, so this will be the region of the thalamus. Here's going to be the hypothalamus. The pineal gland is not in the third ventricle, and here's the pineal gland sticking out back here. This is a model of your ventricles. Here's the two lateral ventricles. This is going to be the third ventricle, cerebral aqueduct. This is going to be the fourth ventricle with the lateral apertures coming out right here. But we are looking at this part right here, the third ventricle. Look how thin it is. And the thalamus is going to be on either side of this. We're going to have a bulge on this side and a bulge on this side. So here is the ventricle model, a side view. This is where the interthalamic adhesion is going to come through, and you'll have one thalamus on this side and then one on the other side. Here's your cerebral aqueduct. It's so hard to visualize, I know. Here's an MRI just to show you where this diencephalon is located. Corpus callosum, this would be the septum pellucidum. Deep to that would be the lateral ventricle. Here is the area of the diencephalon. Here's going to be the thalamus. It's a big oval mass here. Here is the hypothalamus, and it's going to be connected to the pituitary gland. Remember, the pituitary gland sits here in the sella turcica. So, but here's the infundibulum, or the pituitary stalk, and back in here is our little ding pineal gland, right there, pineal gland. So on this brain, this real brain, we are able to see the septum pellucidum once it's been cut. So there's a hole in the septum pellucidum, and now we have a view into the lateral ventricle here. So I just wanted to show you that. Here is actually, you can see this little opening right here. This is actually the opening. This is called the interventricular foramen. Remember the interventricular foramen? Those drain the lateral ventricles and take CSF into the third ventricle that is sitting right here. So that is a cool view of the interventricular foramen. But here is our diencephalon. Here's our diencephalon. The pineal gland is right over here. We can see the choroid plexus right here, this tuft of capillaries right there. Thalamus, interthalamic adhesion right there. Here's going to be the hypothalamus right here. And it looks like the pituitary stalk has been cut, but it's right here. So easy to see here. I hope you guys can all see that. Now, let's get back to the thalamus. The thalamus is the biggest part of the diencephalon. It's about 80% of our diencephalon. It's a pair of large oval masses. It's a pair, so there's one in each cerebral hemisphere. So we got one on the right and one on the left. So here's the thalamus on the left, thalamus on the right. You can barely see it, but there's a space here. This is where the third ventricle is going to be. They are on either side of the third ventricle. Remember, these were the basal nuclei I talked about. You've seen those already. Here's the internal capsule. This is all gray matter. This is all gray matter. So there is lots of neuron cell bodies. So these guys must have a big job to do because there's lots of them. So there's this view of the thalamus. Here's this basically the same picture but drawn. The other one was real, but here you can see the thalamus on this side, thalamus on this side. Here is the interthalamic adhesion joining them. This is going to be the third ventricle. They are telling you this is the third ventricle. And here is the internal capsule with your basal nuclei right there, basal nuclei. Another picture, just so you can see it multiple times. These are, the green things are basal nuclei. We're looking at the blue things. This is a thalamus on this side, thalamus on this side. Here is the interthalamic adhesion connecting the two, going through the third ventricle. Going through the third ventricle. This is a good view showing you the third ventricle and that interthalamic adhesion going through that third ventricle. This is a real one. So this has been dissected out of a brain. Here's the thalamus. Here's the thalamus. Here is the area where the third ventricle would be. So this is kind of cool. So what is the function of the thalamus? There's lots of gray matter. The thalamus is just a big collection of gray matter. So that means there's a big collection of cell bodies. Cell bodies of what? Of interneurons. This is just all interneurons up here. So remember this. Sensory input comes in through the dorsal root. Dorsal root, here is our dorsal root ganglia. And then the sensory afferent axon is going to be synapsing with an interneuron. And that interneuron in the spinal cord is located in the dorsal horn. Remember the dorsal horn, the gray matter of the spinal cord. That interneuron will then go into the white matter and send that sensory information up through an ascending sensory tract. Where is it going to go? It is going to synapse. This interneuron is going to synapse with an interneuron in the thalamus. Once it gets to the thalamus is going to relay that impulse, that sensory information, that sensory impulse to its precise location within the cerebral cortex for interpretation. So hopefully that makes sense. The thalamus receives sensory messages from the spinal cord and then directs it to the cerebrum's sensory areas. That is the job of the thalamus. They call it the gateway to the cerebral cortex, but it is all sensory information that is going, that it's sending into the cerebral cortex. So hopefully this kind of makes sense. Sensory interneuron down from the spinal cord, synapsing with the interneurons of the thalamus, and they're going to send, those interneurons are going to send it to the precise location on the cerebral cortex where it needs to be interpreted. Now let's go on to the hypothalamus. This little region that down here that is connected to The pituitary gland, tiny little region, important for homeostasis. This guy does so much. Regulates body temperature, controls appetite, thirst, your heart rate, metabolism, plays an important part in emotional and sexual responses. We say the hypothalamus is the bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine system, because the pituitary gland is huge amount of hormones are going to be controlled by the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus not only produces hormones itself, it will control the hormones that are within the pituitary gland. So we say the hypothalamus is the master of the autonomic nervous system. So when we get to the autonomic nervous system, so much of this stuff, regulating your body temperature, heart rate, metabolism, all that stuff is being controlled not by you, but by your autonomic nervous system. And this hypothalamus is controlling a major part of your endocrine system. Very, very important job for that hypothalamus. Tiny. I want to just show you can't even see the hypothalamus there, but on the front, you'll see there's the hypothalamus. That is the amount of real estate your brain has for the hypothalamus, yet it is controlling basically so much of you. That is amazing. Here's showing you the hypothalamus. Here are all the interneurons. Remember, the hypothalamus is gray matter. It is loaded with interneurons, and is these interneurons that are controlling all these pituitary hormones. So a huge job, huge job. So finally, let's get on to the epithalamus. Epithalamus, the only thing you need to know about the epithalamus is this guy, the pineal gland. The pineal gland is an endocrine gland, and it secretes the hormone melatonin. You've probably heard of melatonin before. If you have trouble sleeping, you take melatonin. This hormone helps regulate your sleep-wake cycle. That's all you need to know about the epithalamus, that it's where the pineal gland is located. Here is your thalamus, interthalamic adhesion, hypothalamus, infundibulum, which is controlling the pituitary gland. I wanted to show you this real brain. Oops. Here you can see the thalamus. You can actually see the 3D structure of the thalamus better here too. So thalamus, it's a bulge. Remember, there's one in each cerebral hemisphere. Here is the interthalamic adhesion. Here is the hypothalamus. Here is the infundibulum. And back here is this little guy. This is the pineal gland. So this is the classroom model. So easy to see on this guy, but I want you to be able to see it not only on any drawing, but on a real brain. Once you figure out where it is, you should be able to identify the diencephalon no matter what image I show you. So here's your corpus callosum. Here's the septum pellucidum. Here is the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Here is the little itty bitty pineal gland, that little white thing right there, the pineal gland of the epithalamus, secretes the hormone melatonin. Here is the thalamus. Here is the interthalamic adhesion. Here is the hypothalamus. Here is the infundibulum, aka pituitary stalk, and that is what is controlling the pituitary gland and its release of its many endocrine hormones. So is that it? Yep, that's it for the diencephalon. On to the brainstem.